Hi folks, and welcome to the Meaningful Money Podcast. This is session number 315. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you put your finances in order. My name is Pete Matthew, and I'm going to share with you everything you need to know and everything you need to do to secure your financial future. I'm here to help you make sense of money. Hi folks, great to have you with me. Thank you so much for joining me. There are still precious few personal finance podcasts here in the UK, let alone podcasts with hundreds of episodes in the back catalogue. Now, one of those, except for the esteemed podcast that you're listening to now, one of them is Money to the Masses, led by my good friend and real kindred spirit, Damien Fahy. So today I'm chatting to Damien. He's a repeat guest, but specifically I'm talking to him about his new tool, online tool, called the Money MOT, Damien's Money MOT. So looking forward to bringing you that interview. It's anyway, it's good. I think you're going to enjoy it. So after that, obviously, I'll cover a review like I normally do, talk about what we're going to be discussing next time. But before all that, remember, this podcast is brought to you with the help of my friends at 7 Investment Management. They've been helping me out here for ages now, as you know, so please do check them out because I'm super grateful to them. They're at 7im.co.uk. That's the number 7im.co.uk. And don't forget the new Meaningful Money branded 7im Self-Invest platform. All the information you need about that, head over to meaningfulmoney.tv/podcastinvest. meaningfulmoney.tv/podcastinvest. Okay? Now, Damien Fahy needs no introduction, really. Many of you who are listening to me will also be listening to his excellent show. He and I can chat for hours. He's a great friend of mine. We've got to know each other through this incredible medium of podcasting. So he and I can chat for hours, and we do go on a bit on this conversation, but we cover a lot of ground, right? So it's an opportunity for you to listen in as he and I chew the fat on all kinds of things, starting with this excellent new tool, Damien's Money MOT. But we go a lot further than that towards the end, so definitely stay tuned. Remember, notes and links from today's show, they're at the show notes, which is the only link you need to remember. That's meaningfulmoney.tv/session315. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Damien Fahy. Well, what a joy. Always a pleasure to have my great friend Damien Fahy from Money to the Masses here on the Meaningful Money podcast. Damien, my friend, how you doing, bud?
I'm good. There's a big man hug coming to you the other way from me to you, Pete.
A virtual one. Yeah, absolutely. We've connected right from day one, haven't we? And, we've really sort of forged a good friendship because we're of like mind, which is...
Exactly. And that's what's been great about the whole journey of what I've been on and you've been on. It's about meeting people of a like mind, and I think that's where you and I have become good friends, and we've done things sort of outside of the podcast and money world, and it's been fantastic.
Yeah, we'll come back to that a little later, but obviously lots of people listening to this will know who you are, mate, but some won't, so why don't you just give us a sort of quick version for those who don't know who you are.
Okay, so I am Damien Fahy. I run moneytothemasses.com, and it's a financial planning website, and we have a podcast, which is why some of you will know who I am. We have done books in the past. We have created something called 80/20 Investor, which actually helps people manage their own money. It basically teaches people how to be DIY investors. And the whole premise of Money to the Masses came about because, like Pete, I worked in the financial planning industry, and many moons ago, it was about 9 years ago now, that I decided I wanted to do a little bit more and was feeling a little bit lost in the world of financial planning in terms of making rich people rich. So I started something on the side that was Money to the Masses, which was just giving away the knowledge I had for free. And it was an altruistic thing. It was no motive and ultimate plan, which is sometimes how the best things work. You just do it. You just start the ball rolling and see what happens. So what happened in the end was, fast forward 4 years from that point, it started as a blog, it snowballed. We had so many people that I decided to quit my job and started Money to the Masses full time, went on it. And it was kind of a sink or swim moment. You're going to be in the deep end and it's going to work or it isn't. And it blew up from there. And we're now at the point where I'm recording this. If you ever see the video of this podcast, I'm in the offices of moneytothemasses.com. We employ a number of people. My co-host Andy has just become an employee of Money to the Masses. And so it's all just grown, and it's all down to the fact that it's driven, just like what Pete does, by engagement with people, giving them what they want and listening to readers and listeners. So it's been a great journey, and it's onwards and upwards.
Did you ever think that it would end up as it has? You know, you sort of young family pounding out blog posts in the evenings and stuff. Did you ever see the fact that you'd have an office with multiple staff and the kind of success that you've achieved?
No. I mean, I could sit there and go, I thought it would.
I had a grand vision.
Yeah, and what I have to say is I knew the value of what I was doing because there was obviously a big value in terms of the monetary amount for the people who were getting the advice in the first place. But it came down to the fact that when you first start these things, you feel like you're just whistling in the dark. You're doing something and it's not necessarily getting any traction. But I knew there was value in it, so I just started doing it. And like all the habits you get in life, you start something and then it became an itch I couldn't stop scratching. And over time, if anybody's ever going to follow a passion, ever do anything, the one tip I would give them is consistency. If you do something consistently enough, and you guys follow Pete, if you go back and see his videos he did many moons ago, he was doing them consistently, which is one of the hardest things. That then started to build into what we've got now. If you've got a consistent message, people keep coming back. And then it was about 3 years in, I then did think that this could go somewhere, but it's still a lot of hard work because just like you, it's that thing. People just think these things happen and they suddenly find out about you and what you do and go, wow, this is amazing. But they don't realize it's been 9 years of hard work of sitting up in the early hours, because I started it when my daughter was born. It was the trigger for me of what am I doing with my life? Am I happy with what I do? And that was the main trigger. And of course, she was a terrible sleeper. I had a job. I was doing this on the side. And it's one of those things that you've got to have a lot of faith in it and a passion. Otherwise, it will you'll give up. Like
yeah, because you would. Yeah. So when it stops being fun, I will stop. But I can't ever see that happening.
Well, I don't know about you, Pete. I find that it's becoming more fun.
Yeah.
Because the engagement you get now. So we'll come on to this later. We will talk about it. But when you meet people for the first time who you've helped or influenced in some way, that's incredible. And it's because you don't realize that a lot of what we do, people listen to us every week, but they don't realize that we don't see them. They feel that they've connected, but we don't connect in the same way because we don't know they're there until they we can see download numbers and how many articles are read. So I never thought it would be quite where we are now. But as the journey goes on, the mist starts to clear and you start to see where you could go.
Absolutely, and the possibilities are endless. But I want to speak to you today specifically about the newly launched Money MOT, but also you've started a this is probably your third podcast, isn't it? The midweek markets. How's that going?
That's great. Before I carry on, Pete, I've got to mention, because we're in an office, I'm recording this in this office, so the Money to the Message Towers, you will hear bangs and people in the background, and it's not Pete's audio. It's just live. This is what happens after a while. So, the midweek markets podcast was brilliant. What happened is I talk a lot about investing on my podcast. I do bits. I try not to make it too heavy, but at the same time, I do a lot of stuff with 80/20 Investor, which was the DIY investment service, and I write commentaries about what's going on in markets, and I enjoy it. And I wanted to try and give something that was free, that was accessible to people, just to engage them, because just like you do, Pete, you want to engage people in investing or financial planning. You've got to spark an interest. For me personally, I think the key is to spark an interest where people go, do you know what? I understood that. And then they go and look and try and discover something themselves. And then they go off into the world of investing or financial planning or reading about economics. It's like when your child starts reading and they learn to read and then they get their own books and then they're off in the corner reading. That kind of gift is amazing.
It is.
And we're trying to do that with investing. And so the investment podcast just came about as something that was almost by demand, and it's just a 10-minute slot every Wednesday where I talk about what's been going on in markets, what's moving them, and what might move them. And it's just trying to make sense of what's going on those screens when you look at why does your portfolio go up and down. There's a story in there.
Absolutely. I was tell people when they're looking at performance and wondering whether the fund they're holding is quotes any good or not. The question has always got to be why. Why has this happened to that fund? Is it just what's going on in the wider markets? Is it a decision made by the management team or whatever? Always find out why. Otherwise, you're just looking at the numbers and they can hide all kinds of misinformation. I think sometimes. Would you agree?
Yeah, and the other thing is there's a story. It's like that old phrase of a picture paints a thousand words. It's the same with a chart on an investment. So you look at your portfolio, just like Pete said, it's why did that do that? Why did my bond fund go absolutely nowhere? Or why did my equity fund plummet? Or that one didn't? And there's a reason for everything.
Yeah.
And that story, it may be way beyond the manager, what he's doing. It may be just a real macro issue that's going on out there. And trying to understand what that is, because, for example, we have now that global growth is absolutely plummeting, it seems to be, and that's starting to feed into equity markets. That kind of story you don't necessarily hear, but that's great to understand. And that also has an impact on your own life, because, look, if global growth starts to slow, it's going to probably slow in the UK, putting Brexit aside, and then that will start to have an impact on your daily life, so beyond investment. So it's just trying to make things engaging and tell the story that's actually there, but you just got to be able to decipher it. It's a bit like if you look at modern art and you go and look in it, and I look at it and I've got no clue what's going on there, and I'm just looking thinking it's just a bunch of squiggles. Yet if somebody who understands it explains it to you, suddenly you get it. And that's what we're trying to do with investing.
You're doing a great job, mate. So tell me about the Money MOT then, because this is, I mean, as we're recording this, I think it's been launched a couple of weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and it'll probably be another week or two until this actually goes live. So tell me about, first of all, tell me about what the sort of conception of it was. What was the trigger and how you've got to the point of launch?
So the Money MOT came from probably a frustration that we had. So if people engage with Money to the Masses and they come along, and normally what happens, they will search, they'll Google something, and they will find an article that we've written or I've written, and a podcast or something like that. And suddenly that answers a question and solves probably a problem for them, and then they move on. But what also can happen is people don't realise all the other stuff that they probably should read around that topic, or the problem they think they've got isn't actually the real problem. So in financial planning, and Pete knows this better than anyone, that sometimes the people come to you with a problem, and actually the real problem is something else within their sort of personal finances, and the solution isn't what they originally thought. So the danger is, what happens is if you just search online, you go into like a bubble of down a route that you think is the solution, which isn't necessarily the case. The other issue is you don't know what you don't know. So that kind of serendipity thing where you can go and discover something and not realize actually that impacts me. So if you go and see Pete will sit down and he'll talk to you, and then suddenly you'll come away with a plan, or even if you don't have a plan, you just had a conversation. There will be things that Pete will have told you, and these clients will go, I didn't realize that was an issue. And it may be something very minor. For example, you haven't got a will in place. So if you don't have a will in place, that's got major implications for not just your assets, but if you have children as well. And it's one of those things that most people don't realise and they don't have in place. So the Money MOT was born out of the idea of how could we take people on a journey? How could we, if they came and had a touch point, how could we get them to actually solve their wider problems that they've got that they might not know they have? How can we direct them to the content that is really relevant to them? Because again, they won't necessarily realise that they should be looking at something about mortgages, or if they just come in looking at stuff about pensions. And it was also trying to bottle up a bit of me in a way, so we could, just like your book, you've got to try and give someone some journey that they can go from beginning to end. Because once people engage with you, they're like, right, I want to solve this problem. So the Money MOT was born out of that kind of concept, and the name really gives a big hint. If you go and have a car MOT, it's not about turning your Ford Fiesta into a Formula One car. It's about making sure your Ford Fiesta is roadworthy. And that's my view on money a lot of the time. It's not about perfection, it's about improvement. So you've got to go from where you are to somewhere a bit better. And it's a journey. You're not going to solve it overnight. And that's why people are clients of financial planners and advisors for a long time. As your life evolves, so does the things you need to do. So what we wanted to do, could we create something that in an ad break in 2 minutes could give someone an MOT of their finances and go, right, you need to concentrate on this. This is something you probably need to look at, and this is not so urgent, and then give them a solution for each of those. So give them points of action. So like an MOT, you need to change your tyres because your tyre treader's got too low. We want to do the same with money, and it was about trying to do it very quickly, succinctly, but with technology. Because, I remember hearing Gary Vee. We're both big fans of Gary Vee, and I remember seeing Gary Vee, who your podcast listeners probably know who he is because you talk about him. He was once at a show, and I was watching him, and he said, phone is the new radio. Sorry,
remote control.
The other way around. Yeah, but it was actually TV's the new radio.
Right, yeah.
Because when you used to sit there and you're sitting in front of the telly, how many times we pick up our phone? And actually TV's on in the background, we're not really watching, we're watching our phones. And it's that idea that we're all on our phones, our solutions that we want in the Instagram world are very quick. Could we do something like that with money? And that's what it's born out of.
It's and you've nailed it. I have to say, I've went through it, which takes hardly any time at all, probably 2 minutes or something like that, and it's fascinating, the output. So just walk us through what it entails. So somebody lands on the MOT, the Money MOT page, and obviously I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes to that, nice and prominent. What process did they walk through?
Well, the first thing, they'll see a picture of me, and they'll probably wonder, has that been touched up? And the answer is probably yes. And
surely not.
It's really, we wanted to do it so it was anonymous. So could you give them 12 questions? So you start off, and it'll be very generic questions. We never ask you for your name or anything specific, but it will go through and ask you about like your gender, and it'll ask you things about have you got a will, or it'll ask you questions about to do with retirement or pensions, things that are very generic that you might not necessarily connect the dots, but we can when we pull them together. And just like you would, Pete, you'd pull these parts together. So they go through 12 questions, and it's very much you touch an answer, a multiple choice. Have you reviewed your certain bills? And you tick which ones you have, and then next question. And the idea was to do it very quickly. What happens then is that it crunches all that together, and then it gives you a grade. Because one of the things that I've learned over the years is that people like to benchmark themselves, and it goes back to the idea I always call that terraced house scenario, where I look out my window every morning and look in the neighbour's garden and look at their decking and think, oh, we could do a decking. It's that idea that we need to know where we are. It doesn't necessarily have much use to anybody, but we do like to know where we are. One of the biggest questions I ever get asked is, what's the average pension pot? What's that got to do with anything? I mean, it's about you in your life. So people want to be benchmarks. What we did is we gave them an overall grade. So it was a bit like going to an MOT and seeing where your car was. And then on 12 areas of finance, from bills, pensions, insurance, mortgages, wills, you name it, inheritance tax, it gives you a quick snapshot. And it's based on Angry Birds. So we've all played Angry Birds. So you used to get the 3 stars.
Yep.
And you get a 3-star rating, up to 3 stars in each area. And then you can see why you got that rating. And then what happens after that, you can just take that grade and see, right, I need to work on these areas. The idea is it had to be very specific to the person.
Yeah.
Because the problem you have in life is that if a student wanted to see how their finances are doing, then generally speaking, they would be told they're not doing very well compared to a millionaire. When the realities are that if a student doesn't have a house, he doesn't need to worry about mortgages, he doesn't need to worry about inheritance tax. All these things aren't issues for them. So we wanted to be able to do it so every year people would retake it, but it would give somebody a chance of getting an A grade if they're a student.
Where they're at.
Where they're at.
Yeah.
And so it's very particular. So what happened then is you get this grade, you can see where you fit in the general population, you can see where you need to work. Then the next step is, well, how do you improve? It's about nudging up those grades, and you can register. That's the point where you then enter your email address. And what happens is, by magic in the background, we compile an action plan which directs you to, you can choose to have an email that comes out daily or weekly. Weekly is actually the most popular, believe it or not, which I think is a good thing, because I think trying to do too much too quickly isn't great. So what will happen, it will go and look at what you've answered and say, but based on what you've answered, you will likely need to, a priority of yours will be, it could be to do with their debts. And this is what you need to do. And it will direct them to services that are services they can trust. It could be a government service or other services, and it will help them solve that problem. Or it will give them some form of content, sort of stuff that you would talk about in your book, for example,
sure.
Pete. And we would do that for every area of financial planning. And then that is bespoke to them. And they will only get the emails that are relevant, and it'll be tailored to them. And the technology these days is amazing. You can actually tailor the content of an individual email based on something somebody told you. So they get that plan, and at the end of it, they should keep retaking it, see if their grade improves. And just to hammer home, it's about nudging the dial, making people better than where they were. Because I'm personally just get a bit bored of people making everybody feel inferior, or the experts you see on telly, and they berate people as if they're stupid. No one's stupid. It's just we've got to be better than where we were. And if we can do that, I know you would be the same, Pete. If you could just make everybody just a little bit better, not perfect, that would be like my life's work, and I'd be happy. But one of the key things I just want to just chuck in there, Pete, is that it's also about financial advice. So I am a champion of financial advice. So what happens is people tend to think that I'm not, because I don't operate in that world anymore. But what the aim is that the problem we have in this country is that people don't know when they need advice and when they don't. And Pete, if you read his book, I know I'm sort of advertising your book, Pete, but I know they should.
I'm not complaining.
That people, if you go to the last chapter of Pete's book, he does a very good part on that. And you don't always need financial advice, but there are distinct times when you do. And part of the MOT was trying to show people and help them decide if they need financial advice so they could go and engage with it. So if we can get more people to seek advice when they need to, and those who don't have to, that would be brilliant as well. So it's all wrapped up in this 9 years of what Money to the Masses is being distilled into one tool online. It's basically like an app. It isn't an app itself, but it's online.
I think, like I said, I think you're doing a great job. What I like about it is it's I think the Americans would use the word specificity, and I'm not even sure that is a word, but it's specific nature, right? The way that obviously it's tailored based on the answers that people give. Because you're right. I mean, we tend to talk on podcasts and in blog posts, and by definition, they tend to be general. You know, it's like, you know, this is, taking out a lifetime ISA might be a good idea, or you should join your employer's pension scheme, all that sort of stuff. But inevitably, then there's a sort of barrage of emails back to say, well, what about my specific situation? This is me. What do you think in this? And if you're anything like me, which I know you are, spend a lot of time responding to those emails and, trying to sort of mold the content to people's specific situations. So it's great that we live in a world where technology enables you to take people's answers and refine what they need to do into some set of clear next actionable steps. So that's very cool.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, Pete, is that it's not about people doing anything with us. It's about pointing them in the direction of things, because they don't know about the tools and bits and pieces out there. And the government launched a kind of a midlife pension MOT just recently, and I'm going to knock it, but the reason, it was just a bunch of links on a page. It wasn't really specific. It didn't do anything other than just say, oh well, there's the pension advisory service. What you need to do, we wanted to do, is give people an idea so they could see what their retirement would look like. Give them a tool that will actually work out, this is what you're paying in, this is how much you should pay in, and give them actionable steps, but direct them to those services when they need them. And I think that what we do is we tend to focus purely on when people get to a very crucial point, so like midlife.
Yeah.
The problem is that in finance, it's almost like there's a midlife crisis, isn't there? Everyone suddenly, it's the point you have more money than you used to, but it's also where all the mistakes you've made in the past, which we all do, are actually now becoming a problem. Whereas why can't we help people earlier or even later and try and help them avoid those mistakes or undo some of them? So that was a big part of it too.
Yeah, no, it's great. How has it been received so far?
Well, I mean, it was quite mind-blowing, really. What happened is it was soft launch. We launched it to our newsletter group. So we sent it out on a newsletter and we did it on social media. And one of the great powers of what we do, and when I say we, I'm talking about you and I, Pete, is that the engagement that you can get from people who listen to the podcast, who follow us online, I don't think they appreciate how powerful that is. because they think that it's all. They think you've got to go through mainstream media and get promotions that way. And what somebody did, it took off and it was doing really well. Then somebody put it on Reddit, and I don't really use Reddit,
No, me neither.
but it is the place. If you put something in there and you're very positive about it, then what tends to happen is everyone goes and looks at it. And we got to the point where we luckily we actually hosted it on a different server, which basically meant that it wasn't on our link directly to our site. So where so many people tried to do it at once, it actually broke it,
Yeah,
which
nice.
which is a great problem to have. But it's
Yeah.
one of those things that we're Justin in the background and all the tech guys, because we have different companies who've been doing all this stuff, and we've outsourced and got people who've got the expertise. They were all suddenly sweating and panicking, and obviously we sorted that out very quickly. But so many people did it, and we had at one point I think it was last week, we had one day we had somebody doing a money MOT every minute,
Come
the
on.
entire day.
Amazing.
And so if you think that that's every minute somebody out there was doing it, and so far, like I said, we've not banged on about it on social media particularly or done too much, but about 3,000 people have done it.
Fantastic.
So 3,000 people have gone through the MOT, been given a score, basically shown how they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then probably about a quarter of those then decide they want to get the plan and sign up to get the email series. But the best part of it, which beyond all that, the numbers are great and you can sit there and talk about that. But the point where I've had emails from people saying, do you know what? I didn't realise the importance of having a will. And I've gone and made an appointment with my solicitor or a solicitor, and we've done our wills because we're going on holiday next week.
Yeah.
And I hadn't quite appreciated it. Or even something as simple as I didn't realise the importance of checking the expression of wish form that I put in on my pension, and they got divorced or something like that, and the circumstances have changed. And it's the actionable steps that people like. They get the idea that I haven't got a lot of time. I want to be better. I want to try and improve things. And it's when you get an email from somebody who just says, I love it, I like it, because you know as much as I do, Pete, people listen to these podcasts and they think that you and I will be extremely confident about everything we do, but there's always that little crumb of imposter syndrome, which is bonkers.
Yeah.
But you send something out, and it's like sending one of your children out into the world, and you think,
Please
God,
love it.
I hope she's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And when people come back and they do, it's fantastic, because you've got to realise this was 6 months in the making.
I bet,
we brainstormed this idea in the summer last year. It was just one of those moments where we were just talking freely in the office, and Justin and I then started unleashing on the whiteboard, and then from there to where it became a product took those 6 months. But it's a lot of hard work, money, etc., that goes into that. And I don't think people realise that. Actually, as I've said that, Justin's wandered into the office. You might hear the door creaking, which is just I'm going to gush about him actually, which was quite convenient. I think he was waiting outside. But you've got to have people who can make things happen. So you can have people like I will come up with an idea and visualize things, but there's a definite skill in making things happen and creating something that works. And that's what's been great about Money to the Masses growing as it has. We have those people who can make that happen. Because 3 years ago, it wouldn't have actually become a product or an entity. So yeah, it's been fantastic.
Fantastic, mate. Well, I wish you every success with it. What is what's sort of next for it? I guess you'll sort of keep iterating a little bit on it, and but have you got sort of plans for other similar or entirely different things for Money to the Masses going forward?
Well, it's a good point, because one of the things, the way it's been built is that the tool itself is just gaining the information from the people, but the scoring happens and is calculated. But the plan itself is always evolving. So there will always be a really quirky scenario where, for example, there'll be somebody and you think, actually, yes, they need people who've got this scenario who could be, for example, self-employed in some way, and they may be having buy-to-lets, and you sit there and think, yeah, that they've got a very specific need. So we need to just point out to them that, yeah, you need to check X, Y, or Z. And so you can add that in and we can evolve it and change it. So that part we have a lot of control over. So it's going to be this beast that keeps evolving to become more include more content. So brilliant. I think the MOT itself will continue to grow in that way. We're going to just promote it more. and we need people to go out there and promote it. And it might not be for everyone, but I think over time what we'll do is we'll try and include um, other areas that will in terms of financial planning, but we want to keep it simple because one of the problems is you can overcomplicate something.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
the idea is you will always get somebody who goes, well, I've gone through and I've got this score, but I'm paying £1 million a year into my pension. And you'd be like, yeah, but we're never going to be able to tell you that because we're not going to ask you how much you pay in. And that's it's trying to engage some of those people. But I mean, at the moment, I just want to get it out there and
Yeah.
let's see what people think and grow it. For Money to the Masses itself, we're going to continue expanding. We're writing more content, and we'll probably come up with something else along these lines and just keep evolving it. But right now, I think we're gonna hold fire and try because the problem is you can build lots of great things,
Yeah.
but you can end up just building things for building's sake. So
Yeah.
I think for us, it's growing more content, growing the team, producing more social media, doing more video. I've
Yeah,
seen
come
Pete.
on.
Pete does loads of good videos. If you're not watching Pete's videos on Facebook, go and watch them because I like the outtakes. And because they happen every now and then where you do a funny little rewind and go and watch them because they're really good videos. I didn't think I'd ever watch a video from beginning to end about the difference between unit trusts and investment trusts, but I did. It's Pete did one, and go and have a look. So we're going to doing more and more videos and perhaps collaborations as well.
Yeah, for sure. Excellent, man. It's all very encouraging. I want to just chew the fat on a couple of sort of entirely, well, not entirely unrelated, but different issues, if you can. You are a champion of financial advice. I did a show probably a year ago, maybe a little bit more, about the state of financial advice, and it was a bit of a rant, actually, and it had come out of just some terrible news, really, from Port Talbot in South Wales that people had, once again been duped out of their pension schemes, all that sort of stuff. Now, obviously, that isn't indicative of the whole financial advice world, but I was pretty cross and said some things on there that got me a little bit into trouble, which was excellent. And I just wonder what your view is, given that you're a champion of the benefits of financial advice, just how you see the current landscape of financial advice in the UK.
Right,
I've dropped that question on you,
no,
listeners.
I occasionally get myself into trouble. Follow me on Twitter, and you'll see sometimes I end up not deliberately, but upsetting some of the financial advice world. My view of the financial advice world is that it's a very bizarre industry because you'll get people like Pete. This is why me and Pete obviously spend time together, and I really champion what Pete does because Pete does it in a very selfless way, and he also champions what he likes about other people and what they're doing. What tends to happen in the financial advice world is there's a lot of ego in it. And part of that is down to because the way the finance world works is they're trying to sell a product, whether it be a fund or a service, by saying that theirs is the best. Whether they actually explicitly say that, the implication is that their advice is going to be better than somebody else's. And what that means is that you get this world of very aggressive and they just snipe. If you want to see a snapshot of the financial advice world, go on Twitter. So if you say anything that doesn't conform with like what the general view is, and that one of the views is that the financial advisors tend to believe, it's not the good ones, but the others I'm talking about, which is the majority. They tend to believe they are the guardians and gatekeepers of your finances, and only they could tell you what you should be doing. And anybody else who tries to even engage with you about money is a complete fraud. And I don't like that. And what happens is you get this world that's slightly, it's very negative. It's very, it doesn't grow. It doesn't evolve. So you just get this kind of dinosaur sort of era where the world is moving on, like with things like podcasts, audio, technology, and they're trying to rein it back. And so I find that the world of financial advice needs to move on. I think the job is not going to disappear, despite what anyone thinks. I think the world is going to be. I've used the analogy before. If you look at Uber, when Uber were doing driverless cars, they didn't just send cars out with no drivers. They sent out a car that was being driven by a machine, but there was a man or a woman sitting in the driver's seat. And so people won't engage with machines in that way because without having a kind of a pilot overseer, it will take time. And I feel the financial advice world will evolve more into that. I think that's where people will go. They want the oversight and they'll pay for it.
Yes.
And I think the idea that you pay for advice that is actually being charged on a annual fee will change. I think that will go where
Yes.
people would rather just pay up front. And I know that Pete is one of the few people who does this. And I think that's just accepting what people want. And so my view of the financial advice world is it's a bit of a dinosaur. It's improving, but even the very best ones you see out there, every now and then they let their masks slip. And even if you ever go and look at some of the arguments, I don't have an argument. I'll put a statement out on Twitter, and then they all start arguing. And I mean, one of them was I highlighted about there was the ban on cold calling,
Yes.
and I just highlighted the point that was just an observation that it actually favoured advisors in a lot of way, the way it was
True.
put through.
Yeah.
Because basically what it meant is that all the advisors who'd cold called in the past and built fantastic businesses, it meant that new advisors couldn't cold call their clients anymore. Anyway, I just pointed out that the idea that cold calling hadn't truly been banned because there were all these caveats to keep the advisor community happy. I just highlighted that if a ban is driven, or the idea of a ban is driven by advisors, then why would you be surprised when the outcome in some way has a loophole or favours them? I'm not knocking the fact that they drove it forward. I'm not knocking it at all. I think you need those. And I was one of the biggest when they first did it. I sent it out to about 15. No, I sent it about 30,000 people.
Yeah.
Sign their petition. Go for it. But the point was that where it ended up was not quite where I think it should have gone, and they could have pushed it further. But I'm not knocking them. They're brilliant. So we've got some real good nuggets in the advice community. We just need them to all join up a little bit more. And I just think that generally speaking, we just need to be a little bit more positive. I just wish they were, as a community, more positive. You've got people like Pete, but that's why Pete is so popular.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I agree with every word you just said. A more positive, more inclusive sort of outlook and a willingness to consider alternatives. Along that vein, I wonder what your view is of the FIRE movement, which is emerging here in the UK. So that's Financial Independence Retire Early, for those listening who don't know what that is. But what your view on it is, because it's really snowballed in the US and it seems to be gathering momentum here. It's something that I'm watching very closely. I think it's very exciting, but it's the sort of thing that might make a lot of advisors nervous if they're even aware of it, which many won't be. I wonder what your take on that whole movement is.
I can say for certain it's gaining popularity because yesterday BBC Moneybox rang me up and asked me what my view on the FIRE movement is. And I like the concept. Right, so FIRE movement, at its core, what it is a plan. So they have a view that they want to retire early or whatever it is they want to do, and they build a plan. So the concept of what it's built on is brilliant. So I like the idea of that part of the FIRE movement. It's not the FIRE movement itself that is the magic. It's the fact that they decided that this is where I want to be, and I need a plan to get there. And that plan is a little bit extreme in cases, I think. It's like mass austerity, and they're going to get there by basically avoiding consumerism, which I do like, so not buying needless things, and they're going to put ridiculous amounts of their income into pensions or whatever they're going to do. I like that, but good financial planning is what it's based upon, but it's kind of an extreme version. So I don't think it's going to upset the financial advice community, but what it will do is it will mean that more people see the value of a plan, even if they don't realise that's what it is. They're just following a group. It does have an element of that Weight Watchers element to it. So it's got the fact that part of the reason it's so popular is because there's that peer pressure element. So if you're part of a movement and you don't do what they're sort of proposing, not a cult, but you're sort of failing. So it's got that. That's a big positive. But the one thing I would say about the FIRE movement, why, if somebody said to me, would you promote it? Do you think it's a great thing? I like it. I think it's very good. It gets people to focus. The one thing I think it lacks is flexibility. Now, the world of finance and everything is there's so many unpredictable things. So I always talk about boilers blowing up. So if your boiler blows up and you're going down this road of ultimate control and you're going to retire early, life has a habit of disrupting things. It's those when things go wrong. I can't remember the term you used in your book, Pete, but you used a term for it. It
Oh, it's
basically meant
I nicked it from Dave Ramsey's Murphy's Law, basically, or Sod's Law, as we would call it. Is that what you mean?
and it's basically planning for disaster,
Yeah.
and there's sort of insurances and things like that. So that can disrupt a hell of a lot of that extreme planning. I just think that what the FIRE movement does have, it has an element where they're trying to control so much to achieve something that when life, as it always does, breaks that and you lose control, I think that feeling of losing control can knock people off it and unwind it. So I like it. I think the concept is good, but it's very American. I think we probably need a bit of a softer British approach.
Yeah.
But I think the concept is sound.
Softer, a more British approach, my God.
Yeah.
I can't sort of have your sort of exclusive attention and not ask you what your sort of answer is to the question which is on everybody's lips right now. Bear in mind we're recording this on the 8th of March, so we're still, 21 days before the sort of big Brexit deadline. I'm getting asked all the time by clients and listeners and stuff, what does it mean, or what will it mean, particularly if there's no deal? I just wondered if you'd be willing just to sort of comment briefly on what your answers to those sorts of questions are and how you think it might all pan out.
I don't think we'll leave. I think we'll probably push the can down the road. I think it seems quite extreme that we're in 20 days. I mean, it's not even a payday away for most people that we don't even know if we're leaving or not. And I mean, that's a crazy world. I think if people ask me what's the impact, I think the idea of trying to plan for Brexit or not Brexit is just a mug's game.
Correct.
Because one of the biggest things is the currency movement, and that's the thing that's going to hit people the most. I just think people have to be prepared that if we suddenly went broke with a no deal, then the idea of the pound versus other currencies, the pound will weaken. So that would go from 130 to 120, possibly. That's the consensus. But the consensus is often wrong. That wouldn't be bad news for your investments, because you've got overseas investments, so they automatically will jump about 10%.
Yeah.
But equally, if we get a deal of some kind, then the opposite will be true and it will strengthen. So I think that in terms of investments, I think planning for it is very tricky. I think you're almost just better off just ignoring it and going for the long term, because if 2016 taught us anything, the people who tried to predict the outcome got caught out because they moved into cash and everything too. Do you know what I mean? They got caught out.
Yeah.
In terms of property, I'm not sure. The property prices, everyone says they're going to fall 30%. That was Mark Carney talking about. That was an extreme stress test, and it got put out in the press. Now I've talked to estate agents, and while there is some impact in certain areas, there isn't as much of an impact as people think. Because what's happened is people have got so bored of talking about Brexit, they think we're never going to exit. And so people are still buying and selling. And a lot of buying and selling happens out of necessity. So I think I would say, don't panic. The one thing you could have if we do exit without a deal is it's going to mean job security is going to be tricky. We might get a problem with inflation because of the pound tumbles. But all these things are hopefully going to be manageable. I think it's going to have an element of the millennium bug. You remember when we all woke up and the planes were going to fall out the sky and it didn't? I think there's going to be an element of that. So I just think for people, you've got to just not panic. And I wouldn't change too many things. I mean, the stock market as it is there are so many headwinds that could cause that to collapse. Let's be honest.
Exactly.
Brexit is just one of them, and it's actually not even the biggest. So
yeah, good. Sage advice as ever, mate. Thank you for that. Just finally, let's just sort of harken back to a certain evening back last November in a pub in the city where you and I said, let's meet up. And then I think it was you said, well, why don't we put it out to our audiences and see who turns up? And, a lot of people did. And we ended up making quite a lot of noise in this admittedly huge pub in London. I'm still amazed by that night. And, people still sort of comment to me on email what a lot of fun we had and when are we doing the next one and stuff. I just... I wonder what your sort of view is on it now, looking back, and what a cool night it was.
I mean, I'm absolutely buzzing, or I was absolutely buzzing after that night, because one of the things it was to get people to go somewhere who've never met you, and some people travelled we were in London, and people came down from Manchester, and these sorts of things where it just showed the level of appetite for what we're doing and the passion people have, and that I don't think people realise that is very motivating, and it fueled me to want to do even more.
Yeah.
And so, as a result, this year we've committed that we're going to go and try and do more meetups and maybe more shows and sort of discussions and things that people can come to. So it was amazing. It was so I don't think people realise how much I got out of it. They thought they came down and they met you and I, but I got as much out of it, if not more, than they did, because it was one of the first times where I'd really met people and mingled, where people talked about how the podcast or site had changed their life, and there's some brilliant stories. And you have to realise that despite the fact that 1.5 million people read stuff on Money to the Masses every year, and we have all the people listen to podcasts, that actually we don't meet hardly any of them. And so when you meet people, you also start to make you think more in a really relevant way. So you start thinking about them. You picture those people when you write and you do your podcast, and it makes the stuff you do better. And one of the things which was brilliant was I loved the fact that so many women came.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, it's International Women's Day today. That wasn't deliberate, by the way, but one of the things that the audience that came, the listeners, was very mixed. That was good, because as two guys, there is this element, sometimes you worry that you don't want to alienate any part of society,
audience,
which is why we're trying to be always inclusive. But the fact that we don't was great. So it was an amazing night. I mean,
really was.
I was pretty drunk by the time I went home. I have to be honest.
I was at Upreneur conference over the following 2 days, and by 3:00 in the afternoon, the day after we'd gone out that evening, I was hanging. I was dropping. It was somewhat jaded in the morning, and by the mid-afternoon, I was no good for anything. I think I've paid the beer.
My favourite bit was when somebody got their book out and asked Pete to sign it. Pete's book. Somebody, I think more than one asked Pete to sign a book. Yeah. It was brilliant.
That was the highlight. Little rock star
really
moment. I mean, I got a lot out of it as well. It was incredibly humbling. It's a bit of a sort of dichotomy, actually, because it was both humbling and very ego-stroking at the same time, but very humbling that folks would take time out and be so warm about what it is that we're doing. And from my point of view, pretty much all the content that's coming out this year on Meaningful Money is inspired by that night and the conversations that I had with the folks that turned up, and it really has set a direction for me this year and beyond, I imagine. So it was a great night, truly memorable, and there'll definitely be more. We'll definitely do it again this year for sure. So Damien, as ever, mate, I'm grateful for your time. It's always a joy to watch what you're doing. Consider you very much a kindred spirit and a great friend. So please keep going. I know you will. And thanks so much for being here today, mate.
Thanks for having me, Pete. It's been fun as ever.
So we covered quite a bit of ground there. Okay, definitely check out Damien's new Money MOT. I've taken it myself and I got a B+, so I've got some work to do. Right? There's a link in the notes, obviously, directly to the MOT. Thanks again to Damien for his insight and for his and all the team at Money to the Masses, their hard work in adding to the sum of great financial information out there for UK listeners. Please keep going, bud. We really appreciate everything that you're doing. So, review from Mojo Healing. Love that. And Mojo Healing's headline on the review is Love It. I came across Pete's podcast after listening to an interview with him on another podcast. Oh, I wonder which one that was. Explains all aspects of money in a simple and understandable way. Currently working my way through all previous podcasts. Only about 250 to go. I wonder if you've made it so far. This review was back in November, so maybe you've managed to listen to them all by now. The Meaningful Money Handbook was wrapped up for both my boys on Christmas Day. Aha, great. Well, I hope they enjoyed it. Depends how old your boys are. If they're like 6 and 4, then hopefully they'll come into it. But thank you, Mojo Healing, for the review. Really, really appreciate it. If you like what you hear, please do leave me a review. meaningfulmoney.tv/iTunes if you are of an Apple bent to your podcast listening mode. But wherever you listen, if you can leave me a review, please do so. Really, really helps. Keeps me near the top of the rankings. Now, next time, I'm going to be answering a question I get asked about, maybe once a week, easily, which is how to become a financial advisor. Now, I know that might seem pretty niche, but even if you've no intention of ever joining this great profession, it will give you an insight into what is required of advisors in terms of qualifications and skills so that you can be armed if ever you need to seek advice. all right? But if you're one of the many people who seems to respond to my sort of evangelism about financial planning and what a great profession it is, then you're going to enjoy it next week's episode. Been meaning to write it for ages just so that I can stop answering emails about it and just point people in the direction of next week's episode. So any questions on that or on anything really that you might want me to answer here, go to meaningfulmoney.tv/askpete. All right, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that come in. And that's it, folks, for this week's Meaningful Money podcast. Looking forward to getting into a new season, which I'll be announcing properly next week. Probably better fade up the music. There we go. There it is. All right. Any questions on today's show specifically, any questions for Damien, leave them at today's show notes. That's meaningfulmoney.tv/session315. Hope you enjoyed it, folks. Thanks again to Damien. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.